What you need is their strategy. What you need is their knowledge. You don't need them to manage a team, to do the kind of roles that CMOs did in the past in the startup space, because you can get that through fractionals.
Today's guest has spent over about 20 years watching the startup marketing playbook evolve. Mack McKelvey, the CEO and founder of SalientMG, a strategic marketing firm. And before that, she was the SVP at Millennial Media, taking the company from a startup through a successful IPO in 2012. She's lived both sides of the startup marketing equation. She's built the traditional in-house teams, and she's watched the landscape shift toward fractional talent, hybrid models, and completely non-traditional approaches to how startups are actually structuring their marketing operations. Mack is also a startup advisor, investor, and has been named the most powerful woman in mobile advertising multiple times. What I want to tap in with her today is her perspective on how the game has changed and what founders need to know about building their marketing teams or marketing functions in 2025, 2026. So if you've ever wondered whether you're building your marketing function the right way, or if there isn't even a right way anymore, this conversation's for you. So let's dive in. Is the traditional in-house marketing team model broken for these early stage startups?
Completely. It wasn't set up for them in the first place. I mean, the challenge that you have is every company needs the same basic infrastructure for marketing, and that comes at a cost. I mean, it's tools, it's systems, and at the end of the day, it's people that understand marketing methodology. So inherently, you need all of these things in a company, but when you've only raised $2 to $3 million, you're building product, you're building capability. That's where your money's going in the early days, but it doesn't mean you don't need marketing. It means you have to think really carefully about how you address marketing.
When we're talking about this shift and things I've been seeing and want you to tell me a little bit more, but these kind of non-traditional models such as fractional CMOs, maybe having an agency for a certain project, certain advisory board members, why are those becoming the norm instead of the expectation of a full CMO and CRO and CFO, et cetera?
I think a couple things. I think it depends on the stage of the company. So I think as you look at more early to mid-stage growth companies, you're not seeing CMOs, you're seeing heads of marketing, directors of marketing, some VPs. I would argue, though, that is part of the problem, because the more strategy you have from the beginning, the more understanding of the marketing muscle you have to build and the motions you have to build and go to market. The earlier you have that in-house, the more you're set up for success. So early stage companies, they could definitely benefit from great knowledge of CMOs and other marketing leaders that have been in their industries, but that is very expensive, going back to what I said originally, but that comes at a cost, and a lot of startups aren't willing to make that kind of investment. I'm going to say the I word nonstop in this conversation today, because the way that I look at it is it's not a cost, it's an investment. And I think more and more we see the really successful companies long term that view marketing as an investment. So what model? It depends on the company. It depends on what you sell. It depends on what motion you need to have in market from a go-to-market standpoint. But I think the reason we're starting to see more of the fractional, so let's just take fractional CMO to begin with right now, is a lot of what a CMO does in-house is the what do you call it? The kind of the political rallying, if you will. There's a lot of internal time marketer spend. That is necessary. It is. But the real thing that they bring that is so invaluable is their expertise. They can cut your time to decisions, cut your time to bad investment, cut your time to bad decisions based on their historical knowledge. So fractional is a way to get a piece of that knowledge without paying for the full-time salary, and maybe at a time where you don't fully need somebody fully, full time, I should say. I'm going to say fully 5 more times, but full time. You may not need that full time. And then to answer the last part of your question, and then we'll move on because I think this is all related, but it sets up the rest of our conversation, is Then there's fractional teams. So you've been in-house, I've been in-house. Everyone that I've worked with that has been in-house will tell you the same thing. They're sitting in meetings all day. They're developing PowerPoints all day. They're working. Don't get me wrong. Everyone in-house works extremely hard, but you're navigating the politics. You're doing a lot of things that aren't the day-to-day job. If you have a fractional team that's blended with your internal team, your internal team's handling that really important internal role, which is that glue function, while your external team is really potentially nailing the day-to-day work, and they're hopefully able to execute it at a really strong level.
All right. We're going to take a second for a positive pause. This episode is sponsored by morepositive.ai. If your feed's been feeling a little heavy lately, go check out More Positive, powered by Cognitive. It's a site that uses advanced AI to find the most uplifting stories from across the internet. Stuff that actually makes you feel good. Human wins, wild discoveries, and moments of joy worth sharing. Because let's be honest, your brain deserves a positive pause. Head to morepositive.ai, the brighter side of the internet, to learn more.
You know, there's two things that immediately came to mind, and one of them is the $1 million question, right? Of how do you get founders and early stage startups to look at marketing as an investment? So that we'll tackle too. But then, you know, for these listeners that we have, if it's a founder, if it's another, let's say, senior marketing practitioner, whatever that may be, can you give us definitions of what fractional is versus this, you know, full-time role, and just expand more on what that difference is? Because somebody that's come from, you know, larger, I would say growth stage companies, I would never even think about it. But, you know, now with these early stage startups, it's something to really think about. So if you could expand, that would be great.
And I would say even beyond early stage, I think even at growth stage, I think it really depends on your level of investment and the level of which you're going to give autonomy to a CMO. If you are a growth stage or scale up company and you're careening towards IPO, right? You're really building a long-term brand. You're creating value within that brand. You need to have a full-time CMO because you're building a long-term strategy and plan to continue to build the equity behind your brand. Here's what I will say. The most effective CMOs I have seen are ones that can balance the internal and the external really magically.
Okay.
But many CMOs get to a level of their career where they are paid an extremely high amount of money and their knowledge is so extensive. What you need is their strategy. What you need is their knowledge. You don't need them to manage a team. You don't need them necessarily to do the kind of roles that CMOs did in the past in the startup space, because you can get that through fractional. So let's talk about that, what that means. I think there's fractional CMOs. That is, call it a part-time CMO. It's someone who is sitting at your executive table and they are probably reporting to the CEO and they are a fractional, meaning they're working a part of the week towards this company. It's a little bit different though than a CMO consultant. A CMO consultant can be any kind of hours, and they are a marketing consultant. They're not necessarily serving in a CMO capacity. But the benefit with that, again, is you get their strategy, which is what you're paying for. And then you can have somebody at a VP or director level that's managing the team or the outside agency, depending on how your team is fully functioning.
When have you started to see this, I'm going to call it a trend now, of this fractional, even CMOs or even other fractional positions as well? When have you started to see this becoming truly a trend? And when have you seen it started to really work for companies?
The model is still being figured out with a lot of companies. I'm going to say right now, if you're a CEO and you don't truly value the marketing role, don't hire a CMO at all, like the fractional or a CMO, right? You're going to want to have a more functional marketing team that probably reports into the chief growth officer or the CRO. There are plenty of companies where that model works great. It's just true, right? There's different companies need different models. So if you're a founder that wants to be very heavy into sales and really wants everything to be in that motion, then I would highly recommend not hiring a CMO, because a CMO is paid to disagree. Their job is to make the company better, is to think about the white space, is to continuously think about the growth and the value of the company. So if you're not in a long-term play, there's never really a reason to have a full-time CMO in-house. When has it been effective? I think it's extremely effective for a lot of companies because it gets them access to talent that normally they couldn't afford. So if they can't necessarily afford to bring in a full-time CMO, if they could bring that person in for 15 to 20 hours a week, they're getting the best benefit of that person because they're very constructed in their time and they're very focused on what they need to deliver, and they can be a really strong partner for that CEO. We're seeing that extremely successful, particularly in growth stage companies. B to C stage companies is where we're seeing that be the most effective. I also think that we're seeing a lot of early stage seed to pre-A or A that are bringing in very fraction of a fraction CEOs or CMOs. So 5 to 10 hours a week, maybe, that's just giving strategic counsel or opening doors for the CEO.
Yeah.
And that has been wildly successful.
And so give us an example then of a scenario like that a fractional CMO can come in and help with versus if you wanted to do B, then you need to have some sort of full-time role.
I would think a fractional CMO or a CMO consultant is an incredibly valuable investment. I think if you have a very senior voice that is in line with strategically how the CEO wants to see things moving, if you're in lockstep, then this person can work across your executive team and make sure everyone is aligned and make sure the marketing strategy all, again, lines back up to that. You can do that in a part-time capacity. But if you're going to go public, if you're going to be a scale up, if you're going into, you want to be an enterprise one day, you're going to want to invest in long-term strategy and long-term build and culture, and you need a CMO in that kind of a role, full time, that every day is living and breathing the brand.
And now that we're talking about these somewhat non-traditional marketing models, I'll call them, what other type of things in that category have you also started to see? So yes, you have a fractional consultant, but are there anything else in early stage startups that you're starting to see really make an impact that is potentially different than what a scale up B2B company would be doing?
I'm going to laugh when I say this because it sounds self-serving, but we're seeing it happen all the time now, is outsourced marketing, particularly in the early days. Because although every company needs to go to market differently and every single company is going to have nuances and they're going to want to, present themselves to the market in a differentiated capacity, at the end of the day, similar to set up anything in a company, there are things you need to do from a marketing standpoint from day one that need to scale with the growth of your company. So if you can invest even in outsourced marketing, this is people that do this all day, every day. They're going to set up your marketing automation, set up your CRM. They're going to get your website in a great place. They're going to get your brand started. They're going to get your basic content written. They're going to get your how you want to communicate to the world built. This can be done externally at a fraction of the cost that it would take to have an internal full-time team. Because what you get is 8 to 10 people's knowledge and hands on keyboards, where if you have a full-time team of one generalist, you're hoping that person can do 8 to 10 jobs. The truth is, founders, if you're listening, they cannot. No human can. Can you? I can't do 10 jobs. I can't do 7 jobs, 8 jobs. No one can. It's not possible. And in the startup space, there is a lot of generalist work that is good enough. It's not good enough if you're trying to build a company to exit or build a company to be a big contributor to your industry. Good enough is not good enough.
I feel like a lot of companies have a hard time accepting that,
No, I know what you're trying to say because I would have felt that way in-house. Remember, I come from in-house too. If my CEO said to me, you know what? You have to let your entire team go and you have to hire a firm or 5 firms or 20 freelancers or whatever it is, I would not have been a huge fan of that. But the model that we're seeing work really well right now, something that we do is we put in a fractional CMO and then we build an agile team around them, meaning the team dials up and dials down based on the needs of the business. So if you have big campaigns launching, you're going to have content, you're going to have digital, you're going to have a few other roles. But those roles may die down when the campaign is in execution, and you may dial up on marketing ops and some other areas. You can't do that if you have a 5 to 7 person in-house team. You can do that if you have an external team. You can keep your budget very rigid, but you can flex up and flex down with external contractors like you can't internally. Now, I'm not advocating for that. So for all my in-house marketers, let me be very clear. I I don't think that's the right answer for everyone. I think external can augment beautifully. And I think for some companies, it makes a lot of sense, not for all companies.
So then do you think it makes sense for a lot of early stage startups that are also maybe the founders aren't viewing marketing as one of the first and foremost, most important?
I wrote an article for Fast Company last year about this subject because I have a very strong opinion on it. I believe the first marketing hire, whether it's a contractor or a full-time hire in a company, is product marketing. Again, it's somebody to set up your systems. It's someone to set up your ICPs and your messaging and your positioning and understand segmentation and figure out your customers' needs so that everything that's being articulated from the company back to your prospects and customers is in line with what the company's trying to build. The faster you get to product market fit, the more on track you are to hit your success metrics and go on to raise more funding and be successful overall. We all know this. So getting to product market fit is the most important thing you can do. But then when you get through product market fit, then you have to get to growth. Then you have to get to scale. So the challenges never stop. That's why hiring one marketing department can be really scary because it's different marketing at every stage of growth. And it means you may need different talent and you need different spend levels. So having that fractional that can help guide you through that is also another benefit to having somebody that has the ear of the CEO that can weigh in on when and where to make the right investments.
What would you say to founders or even executives that are maybe against the kind of fractional or consultant CMO where they're, maybe not as dedicated to the company because they're not full time or they're not, working as closely because again, they're not full time. What do you say to those types of folks?
I get it. And it's not for everyone. So I think that that's the right answer. I don't think it has to be one way or the other. What I want people to know is there are different models. There is not go hire a junior person and 3 freelancers. And that's what you should do. That's not the answer for every company. But there are basic things that need to happen at different stages of growth. And again, there's limited knowledge if you're hiring junior folks that haven't worked at different parts of growth. How are they going to know how to shift their work based on how the company is changing? If you don't have a leader to spearhead how to direct the team through those levels of change, you're going to run into a challenge, which is why, again, I think that a hybrid model of having some in-house and external is the best way to flex up, and it'll save you a fortune.
And I want to circle back to something that you said early on in this conversation of, you said the words a couple of times, is investment. How do you explain to them that this is an investment? And let's say someone listening that is the head of marketing and that is that generalist that is wearing, the 8 different legs, 3 different hearts, that type of thing, that is listening to this and they're like, oh, wow, this sounds great. I need to go to my CEO and say, we need to invest in this. What's that conversation look like? It's
not just with the CEO, and I wouldn't go to the CEO first. I think you want to build a little bit of an internal wave. So this is where building coalition with your peers. So it's talking to sales, everyone in the go-to-market motion. So it's getting a team together with product, sales, finance, and marketing that they all agree. That's what you take to the CEO, because marketing continually puts itself into a silo. And that's why the investment is seen as a cost, not an investment. If you can show how marketing is going to touch the other parts of the business, the objectives and the goals of the parts of the business, you're speaking the language of the executive team. If you're going to talk about what marketing is going to contribute, you're speaking the message of the marketing team. Not everybody in the company speaks marketing. They speak company. You got to learn how to speak company.
Then I'll ask you kind of the same question, but in a little different way, in different audience. Let's say you're a founder listening to this right now, and you're like, oh my gosh, this sounds great. We need this. But I have to now go have this conversation with my head of marketing and my head of product that's happening. What does that conversation look like?
The plan starts it all. So I think the challenge goes back to whoever is running marketing for you today, and you ask for 2 plans. You ask for the realistic plan of what it's going to take to hit your goals for next year. I love an audacious plan. My team hates me talking about this, but I do. I love an audacious goal and an audacious plan, because if you want to do 5 million, you're only going to do the motions that it's going to take to get to 5 million. But if you're setting an audacious plan for 25 million and you hit 7, everyone's going to be pleased with that. There's also the train. The other thing that a lot of founders don't take into, and in-house people don't take into consideration, is marketers have to constantly learn as well, too, right? Our jobs are changing all the time. Algorithms are constantly changing. So there's so much change happening in this discipline. There's so much change happening in your company. There's so much change happening in your industry. There's so much change happening in this discipline. Investment comes when you realize that and respect that, and you figure out how to maximize your talent.
A lot of companies, and especially with startups, and as somebody that stepped in and has started now running the Startup Marketer, which, by the way, is a great resource for all up-to-date information on new tactics, templates, jobs even, etc. So make sure you go check out the startupmarketer.com and join. It is completely free. But this is something that I think is becoming a real big conversation at the forefront, is that startups do not have to run the same way as these big company giants. For example, I know we talk a lot about trying to make B2B advertising and marketing fun again, right? So it's where you don't use the same mediums. And just like you said, it's not going to work for everyone. Everything is not going to work for everyone.
It's also, what are you trying to do? Investment follows strategy, and it should follow strategy. One more thing to my founders out there. If you're not listening to your go-to-market team, which includes marketing, right? If you're only listening to sales, you're only listening to product, if you're only listening to one or two parts of the go-to-market motion, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, you have a go-to-market problem. And if it's not presenting itself today, it is going to present itself at the most inopportune time known to man, because you haven't invested in it going in the right way. It will break.
So then I'm going to ask you again, kind of the $1 million question I think I've asked almost every guest is, how do you make founders see the importance and the value of investing in marketing?
We're marketers. We have to prove it every day. So it's not enough to say what we're going to do. We have to actually do our research and bring a sound plan and really think beyond marketing. What is the impact this is going to have? But not just what impact is this going to have, what are the resources required? What is the support required? If it's financial or whatever, you have to be thinking more holistically. So when you're presenting an investment opportunity, so when founders are going and pitching themselves to be invested in, you're pitching the value the company is going to bring. A lot of times marketers present ideas. They don't present the value that it's going to bring. And I think that's part of it is just we're moving so fast, and people are asking and changing, and priorities are changing left and right. And you have an idea and you're excited about it, and I get all of that. But if you're asking for investment, marketers, we have to do our research too and make it easy for people to say yes to an investment instead of seeing it as a cost.
100%. Well, now I'm going to switch over to the hard part of the interview where...
Oh, wait, I thought we were already in the hard part.
Oh, no. No, this is now going to be the time where I'm going to ask you 4 would you rather questions, and they're going to be hard, but you're going to have to choose. So would you rather build a marketing team of specialists who are world-class at one thing each, or have generalists that can do everything at about a 70% effectiveness?
The second one, without hesitation.
Okay, expand. Why would you say that?
I would always hire generalists, and then I would bring in specialists to support, because the specialists can make them stronger and the generalists can be stronger by the specialists.
And I don't mean to plug the Startup Marketer again, which I do kind of, but we did just release a state of marketing report that is generalist versus specialist. And I think a lot of these types of foundings are very interesting and not what you would expect from a huge scale up company. So
interesting.
Go check that report out. Would you rather have a fully staffed marketing department that requires...
I'm sorry, does that exist? Okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
You have one, but it requires that many layers of approval for every decision, which we all know too well, or a team of 2 with total autonomy, but they are constantly at a burnout risk.
Oh, I know. My gosh.
I know. That's my job. This is the job I'm paid to do.
I would rather the latter. I can manage to the burnout. What I love about what you said, though, is it sounds like these are the scrappy folks. These are the people making things happen. The biggest enemy in startups is time. So if you're layered in weeks of approval, you're going to lose. So I will take the latter, and I will do everything I can to make sure they don't burn out.
All right. Now, would you rather invest all your resources in perfecting one marketing channel that could transform your business, or spread across 5 channels and be mediocre at all of them?
Number one. I mean, it's a balance, because you do need to test. You have to constantly be testing channels, because that one channel will eventually not be effective. So it's a little bit of a trick question, because yes, number one, I would absolutely go down the path of number one, but I would always be testing other channels to see if I'm seeing some signs elsewhere.
Well, would you rather hire someone with 20 years of Fortune 500 marketing experience who needs to unlearn everything, or someone in 2 years in a scrappy startup experience that lacks strategic depth?
Oh, I'm hiring number two all day.
Okay. Tell us why. Expand a little bit.
I can teach strategic depth. I can teach that, and I can always get a consultant to help with the strategy. So again, I think this goes back to there are many more models out there than just putting together $1.5 million marketing team. And by the way, I'm not saying that for every company. For some companies, that makes a lot of sense. But for most companies that haven't figured out their market, they haven't figured out their company, they haven't figured out their growth trajectory, they have to be really careful about adding that expense. Your salary for most companies is going to be your biggest expense, because you don't know where the company's going in those first, 3 or first to fifth year. Being as nimble as you can actually provides you, I think, a huge asset.
Before we go, I would love for you to give our listeners one statement or one piece of advice or one thing that they can take away tactically from this episode with you.
We are in the era of the individual. People want to know what people are about. If they want to work with them, if they want to work for them, if they want to work through them, whatever it is. This is a time for all of us to step back and really invest in ourselves. And again, I am excited about Startup Marketer for lots of reasons, but I think training and being around people that can challenge you and being open to getting to know new vendors and thinking big, thinking really big, training like an athlete. I mean, really, it is that. It's constantly honing your experience, getting to know your market, and never sitting still. That's what gives you the competitive edge. And if you invest in yourself, you get to have the choices of which way you go. In-house, out-house. I said it. In-house, outsourced. But you get to carve your own path. So I think that is what I would say is work on yourself, your brand, yourself, what you know, become the strongest marketer that you can become, so you have all the opportunity.
Fantastic, Mac. Thank you so much for joining us this episode on Startup Marketer Uncut. We'll see everyone in 2 weeks.